All right, buckle up because today we're going deep into some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one.
Philosophical misogyny, no less.
Oof.
And you sent over some really intense material on this, and we're going to unpack it. We're going to see how some of history's greatest minds actually came up with arguments for why women are supposedly inferior.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right? It's like, I think it's important to remember that we're not here to endorse these ideas at all,
Of
obviously.
course, of course.
But I think by examining them, we can start to see how ingrained they are in our history and how they might still be affecting us in ways that we don't realize.
Yeah, it's like holding up a dusty old mirror to society and being like, oh, wow, look at that.
Right, exactly.
So how do we even define philosophical misogyny? What are we even talking about here?
Yeah, well, it's not just like your everyday sexism. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's sort of a deeper, more insidious kind of contempt for women. It's
Hmm.
like a hatred that's baked into the ideas themselves.
So it's like it's giving an intellectual framework to justify treating women as less than.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what makes it so dangerous.
It's like it's trying to make discrimination sound smart.
Right. It's like dressing up prejudice in a fancy suit and trying to pass it off as philosophy.
Okay, so what are the main ingredients of this messed up recipe? Like what are the core tenets of these misogynistic philosophies?
Okay, so imagine like these pillars holding up this big crumbling structure of misogyny.
Right. Okay, I'm picturing it. It's not a pretty sight.
No, it's not. So one of the biggest pillars is this idea that women are just biologically and intellectually inferior to men.
Oh, here we go.
Right. And this is where you get guys like Schopenhauer coming in.
Oh boy, Schopenhauer.
Yeah. He actually argued that women are, and I'm quoting here, childish, frivolous, and short-sighted, and that they lack the capacity for reason.
Okay, so not a fan of women then.
Not exactly, no.
I mean, it's just wild to me how these guys could just make these sweeping generalizations about half the population.
Sure. Yeah, no, you start to wonder if they actually ever, talk to a woman.
Right. Like, did they just, like, lock themselves in their studies and make all this stuff?
Apparently so. But it gets even worse. Like, there's this guy, Otto Weininger.
Okay, Otto Reininger. Hit me with it.
So he was even more extreme. He claimed that women are completely empty. Like, they have no individuality, no soul, no creativity, nothing.
Wow, that's harsh. So basically, according to these guys, women are incapable of any kind of deep thought or original contribution.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
It really is.
So we've got women are not smart, they're not deep thinkers. Okay, what else?
Well, then you get this idea that women are also emotionally unstable and irrational.
Oh, the classic women are too emotional argument.
Right. Which, of course, they used to justify keeping women out of leadership positions.
Oh, of course, because clearly all the best leaders are known for their calm, cool, and collected demeanor, right?
Exactly. And this one goes all the way back to Aristotle, actually.
Wait, Aristotle, like the Aristotle? The
Right.
father of Western philosophy.
The one and only.
Okay, so Aristotle was kind of a misogynist too, huh?
Well, it's complicated. He was working within the scientific understanding of his time.
Which was
Let's just say a bit limited.
a tad flawed, perhaps.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
But the point is, his ideas had a lasting impact and set the stage for a lot of the discrimination that followed.
It's amazing how these ideas, even when we know they're based on bad science, can still have such a long shadow, you know?
Yeah, it's like they get embedded in our culture and it's hard to shake them off.
Okay, so we've got intellectual inferiority and emotional instability. What other lovely qualities did these philosophers attribute to women?
Oh, we can't forget moral inferiority.
Oh, good Lord, lay it on me.
This is the idea that women are inherently deceitful or manipulative.
Ugh, I can already see how this has been used to justify some terrible things.
Exactly. It was used to control women, to keep them in their place.
It's like they were trying to find any excuse to limit women's freedom and autonomy.
Yeah, and then you have religious narratives, like the story of Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Ah, yes, the original temptress.
Right, which reinforces this idea of women as, leading men astray.
It's wild how these ideas can become so deeply ingrained in our culture, even in our religious beliefs.
It really is. And then, of course, there's the idea that women are naturally submissive.
Ah, yes, the barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen stereotype. A classic.
So progressive, right?
Ugh, it's just so frustrating.
And what's even more frustrating is when you think about someone like Weininger, who we talked about earlier.
Mr. Women are empty vessels himself.
Right. So he's shouting all this misogynistic stuff, but at the same time, He's idealizing the pure mother figure.
Wait, so he wants women to be both subservient and these perfect, selfless mothers. Talk about mixed messages.
Right. It makes no sense. They want women to have no agency or independence, but also be these amazing, nurturing mothers. It just highlights how twisted and contradictory these arguments can be.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good grasp of the pillars of philosophical misogyny, but who are some of the key figures who actually built this, shall we say, problematic structure?
Well, we've already touched on Aristotle.
Right, the OG misogynist.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Okay. Maybe not the OG, but definitely a significant contributor to
To the canon.
to the canon of misogynistic thought.
Okay, I'll give you that.
I mean, his influence on Western thought is undeniable, but yeah, his ideas about women were, to put it mildly, problematic.
For sure. And even Plato, who's often seen as more progressive,
Yeah, like,
he still believed that men were naturally suited to rule and women were, well, not.
so still very much a patriarchal worldview.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and then as we move through history, who else joins this not so illustrious club?
Well, we've got Rousseau during the Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment? Seriously, I thought that was supposed to be the age of reason.
You'd think, right. But even then, these ideas about women's inferiority persisted.
So Rousseau was, what, advocating for women to stay home and just, like, churn butter and raise babies?
Pretty much. He believed women should be educated, but only for the purpose of being good wives and mothers.
Wow, so enlightened.
Not so much.
Okay, who else?
Well, then you've got Schopenhauer in the 19th century.
Yes, Schopenhauer, the king of gloom and doom and misogyny.
Yeah, he really had it out for women. He called them obstacles to male greatness.
I read some of his work, and it's actually painful to see how much contempt he had for women.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
And then, of course, we can't forget our friend Weininger,
Oh, yes, Wayne.
whose book Sex and Character is just a whole other level of crazy.
A wild ride, for sure.
But it's a good reminder that even brilliant minds can be completely warped by prejudice and bigotry.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. So we've got this lineup of histories. Let's call them problematic thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get real for a second. How do we dismantle these arguments?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're obviously deeply flawed and, frankly, just wrong.
Right, like, where's the antidote to this intellectual poison?
Well, first of all, we need to recognize that these philosophies, at their core, are dehumanizing.
Yeah, they're basically trying to erase women's individuality.
Exactly. They strip women of their unique experiences, their potential, and replace it all with these harmful stereotypes. It's a completely messed up way to view half the population.
It's like they're trying to cram everyone into these tiny little boxes based on gender. No room for complexity or individual expression.
Right, and when you really examine these arguments, they fall apart pretty quickly. There's no real logic or reasoning behind them.
So it's less about genuine philosophical inquiry and more about trying to justify their own biases.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But thankfully, there's been a strong counter-movement to all this feminist philosophy.
Okay, so feminist philosophy is like the intellectual rebellion against all this misogynistic BS.
Exactly. It challenges those old, tired frameworks and highlights the contributions of women throughout history.
So it's like a direct rebuttal to this whole women are intellectually inferior crap.
Precisely. And on top of that, modern science has debunked a lot of the arguments for gender inequality.
Right, like the whole women are biologically inferior thing is just flat out wrong.
Completely wrong.
Yeah.
Studies show no significant differences in intelligence or any of that.
Nature versus nurture, and nurture wins again.
Every time.
So we've debunked the science, we've got feminist philosophy pushing back against these old ideas, so what's the problem? Why are we still dealing with this?
Because it's not just about ideas. It's about how those ideas manifest in the real world.
Right, like philosophical misogyny isn't just some abstract concept, it has real-world consequences.
Exactly. It limits opportunities for women. It creates a culture of discrimination. It can even lead to violence.
It's the difference between talking the talk and walking the walk.
Right. We can talk all day about how these ideas are wrong, but if we don't actively challenge them in our everyday lives, nothing will change.
So, while we may be winning the intellectual battle, the war against misogyny is far from over.
Unfortunately, yes.
Which, I guess, brings us to our next point. The lingering legacy of these ideas. How philosophical misogyny is still shaping our world today.
Exactly. We've dug up the roots, we've seen the arguments, and now we need to understand how these harmful ideas continue to impact us, often in very subtle and sneaky ways.
And that's what we'll be tackling in our next segment. So stay tuned as we explore how these seemingly ancient ideas have managed to weasel their way into our modern institutions and shape our cultural attitudes. Welcome back. I don't know about you, but after all that, I kind of feel like I need a mental detox.
Yeah, it's a lot to process, isn't it?
All those centuries of ingrained misogyny.
Oof, it's heavy stuff.
But as you always say, awareness is the first step towards dismantling these harmful ideas.
You got to know what you're dealing with before you can start to fix it.
And we've definitely got a lot of work to do because, as we've seen, philosophical misogyny is not just some relic of the past. It's still very much alive and well today.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's often hiding in plain sight.
So it's like this invisible force shaping our world.
Kind of, yeah. It's like it's seeped into the groundwater.
The groundwater.
Yeah, and we're all still drinking from the well.
Okay, I get the analogy.
Good. So how do we clean up this water supply? How do we get rid of this toxic misogyny that's still poisoning our culture?
Right, that's the big question.
Yeah, well, it starts with education.
Education. Okay, tell me more.
Well, it's about expanding our knowledge base, right?
Right.
It's about seeking out diverse perspectives, making sure
Yeah.
that we're not just listening to the same old voices.
So reading books by women philosophers.
Exactly.
Listening to podcasts hosted by women,
Yeah.
watching documentaries about, badass women throughout history.
That's the idea. It's about actively challenging those old misogynistic narratives that we've been fed.
It's like we need to reprogram our brains
Right.
to unlearn all the BS that's been, passed down through generations.
And then it's not just about what we consume. It's about how we interact with the world around us.
Okay, so what do you mean by that?
I mean, when you encounter those old, tired, misogynistic arguments, don't just let them slide.
So if someone cracks a sexist joke,
Call it out. Make it clear that kind of language is not okay.
it's about creating a culture where those harmful ideas are no longer welcome.
Exactly. And, those little actions, they might seem small, but they can have a ripple effect.
It's like you're sending out a signal.
Yeah. Like, hey, we're not going to tolerate this anymore.
So it's about having those tough conversations even when they're uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And it's not always easy, but it's so important.
But it's not just about individuals speaking up,
Yeah.
right? We also need to address the systems that are perpetuating these ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We need institutional change.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we change the systems?
One of the most powerful things you can do is support women in leadership positions.
Okay, voting for women in political office,
Right. Exactly.
advocating for women in our workplaces,
Yeah.
mentoring young women.
Yes. We need more women in positions of power.
It's not just about fairness, it's about bringing diversity of thought and experience to the table.
Exactly. And it can start with something as simple as encouraging a young woman in your life to pursue her dreams.
To believe in herself, to know that she can achieve anything.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so important. So we've got education, we've got institutional change. What else?
What other tools do we have in our arsenal to fight this philosophical misogyny?
Well, we can't forget about the power of storytelling.
Storytelling. Okay,
Yeah.
how does that fit in?
Well, the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives we perpetuate, they have a huge impact on how we view the world, right?
So it's like changing the script, flipping the narrative.
Exactly, yeah. We need to challenge the dominant narratives that reinforce misogyny.
And uplift the stories of strong, resilient women.
Yes, women who have defied those limitations and achieved amazing things.
It's about highlighting the counter narratives, the stories that show us what's possible.
Right, and that can start with something as simple as, sharing articles about inspiring women,
Recommending books by female authors.
watching films and TV shows that portray women in complex, nuanced ways.
It's about being conscious consumers of media
Exactly.
and using our choices to support those who are challenging the status quo.
Yes. And then there's the power of supporting organizations that are actively working to advance gender equality.
Okay, so groups that are, fighting for women's rights,
Right, providing support to women and girls.
advocating for policy changes.
Exactly. These groups are on the front lines, doing the hard work.
So put your money where your mouth is, right?
Exactly. Volunteer your time, donate to a cause you believe in, spread awareness about their work.
Every little bit helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we're not in this alone. There's a whole community of people working toward the same goal.
And together we can make a real difference.
Collective action. That's the key. Think
Yeah.
about the suffrage movement.
Right? Women fighting for the right to vote.
It took decades of organizing, protesting, advocating.
And they eventually won.
They did. Change takes time, but it does happen.
So we've been talking a lot about solutions, and I think it's important to acknowledge that this is not going to be
Oh,
easy.
it's going to be a long, hard fight, for sure.
We're talking about dismantling centuries of ingrained prejudice and inequality.
Yeah, it's not going to happen overnight.
There are going to be setbacks, there's going to be resistance,
Absolutely.
there are going to be times when it feels like we're not making any progress at all.
Yeah, but we can't give up.
So how do we stay motivated? How do we keep going when the fight feels overwhelming?
Well, for me, it comes back to hope.
Hope.
Yeah, hope that we can create a better world for our daughters, our granddaughters.
For all the women who come after us.
Exactly. Hope that we can dismantle those systems that hold women back.
And create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Yes, that's the goal. A world where everyone is treated with respect and dignity.
Equality for all.
Exactly. But it's not just about hope, right?
Right.
It's also about action, taking those small, everyday steps to challenge misogyny.
To support women, to advocate for change.
Every action, no matter how small, it creates a ripple effect.
It's like those little drops of water.
Yeah.
Eventually, they can carve a canyon.
Exactly. So keep pushing, keep fighting, keep believing.
Because change is possible.
It is. It really is.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the history of philosophical misogyny to its impact on our modern world.
Yeah, it's been a pretty intense journey.
And we've talked about all sorts of ways to challenge these ideas, both on a personal and a systemic level.
But there's one thing I think we haven't really touched on yet.
Oh, what's that?
We've talked a lot about the harm that philosophical misogyny does to women, but what about the impact it has on men?
That's a great point. I mean, we often focus on the victims of misogyny, but it's important to remember that it hurts men too.
Yeah, it really does.
It's like by trying to put women in a box,
Yeah.
they're also putting men in a box.
Exactly. They're confining men to these rigid roles and expectations.
Which honestly doesn't sound very fun.
It's not. It limits their potential. It stifles their emotional expression.
And it prevents them from having authentic connections with women.
Yeah, it's like they're trapped in this cage of masculinity.
And they're not even allowed to express their full range of human emotions.
Think about how boys are often raised to suppress their emotions, to be tough and stoic.
To man up and
Right.
not show any weakness.
Yeah, and that can have a devastating impact on their mental health.
It's like they're being told that to be a real man, they have to deny a part of themselves.
Exactly. Which is, a pretty messed up message.
And it can lead to all sorts of unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Aggression, violence, substance abuse.
So, philosophical misogyny not only harms women, it creates a culture where men are pressured to conform to these harmful norms.
Right. And it hurts everyone in the process.
It's a lose-lose situation.
Exactly. We need to understand that gender equality is not a zero-sum game.
It's not about women winning at the expense of men.
Right. It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to live their fullest, most authentic lives.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, our interconnectedness.
And the fact that we all benefit when everyone is treated with respect, dignity, and equality.
That's a great point. It's not about us versus them. It's about all of us working together to create a more just and equitable world.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
Oh, so let's take a quick break to let all this sink in. And when we come back, we'll leave you with some final thoughts and some resources to help you continue exploring this important topic. And we're back.
Man, that was a lot, huh?
Yeah, my head is spinning.
It's like we went deep into this rabbit hole of philosophical misogyny, and it's like, whoa, there's a lot down there.
It's deep.
Deep and dark and twisty, but I think it's important that we went there.
Oh, absolutely. Because, you can't fix a problem if you don't know it exists, right?
Exactly. And sometimes you have to confront the darkness to appreciate the light.
Ooh, I like that. So we've stared into the abyss. Now what? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that change is possible.
Okay, so there's hope.
There is. We're not just like passive recipients of these harmful ideas.
Right, we can actually do something about it.
We can, and we have to. So what are some takeaways? What can people actually do to challenge these ideas?
Okay, so actionable steps. I like it.
Yeah, so first off, remember what we said about awareness.
Right, like becoming a misogyny detective.
Exactly. Pay attention to the language you use, the jokes you tell, the assumptions you make.
Woo, that's good. It's like look for those subtle clues, those seemingly harmless comments or behaviors that actually perpetuate these harmful stereotypes.
And when you spot them, Call them out. Don't be
Right.
afraid to have those uncomfortable conversations.
Okay, so step 1, awareness. Step 2, speak up. What else?
Well, remember how we talked about the power of counter narratives?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's like finding the antidote to the poison.
Right. So if you're feeling bombarded by all this negativity, seek out those voices that offer hope and inspiration.
So, like, read books by women authors.
Yes.
Watch movies directed by women.
Watch movies starring women. Listen to music by women. Follow women on social media.
Surround yourself with strong female voices.
Exactly.
Okay, so step 3, find the counter narratives. Fill your life with inspiring stories of women who are defying the stereotypes.
And share those stories with others.
Right, like start a book club or have a movie night with friends.
Exactly. Spread the word.
And then, of course, there's the whole idea of collective action.
Right. Remember we talked about the suffrage movement.
Yeah, how it took decades of organizing and protesting for women to finally win the right to vote.
And they did it.
They did. So what does that look like today? How can we take collective action to fight philosophical misogyny?
Well, there are all sorts of organizations out there that are doing incredible work to advance gender equality.
So, like, groups that are advocating for policy changes, fighting for women's rights,
Right.
providing support to women and girls all over the world.
Exactly. And these organizations need our support.
Okay, so step 4, get involved. Volunteer your time, donate to a cause you believe in, spread the word.
Every little bit helps.
Okay.
And remember, change doesn't happen overnight.
Right, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. So be patient, be persistent, and most importantly, don't give up hope.
Because a world without misogyny, that's a world worth fighting for.
Absolutely. And that's a great note to end on, don't you think?
I think so. So, to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into philosophical misogyny. It's been a journey for sure.
It has.
But hopefully you've come away with a better understanding of how these harmful ideas have shaped our world
And more importantly, how we can challenge them.
and build a more just and equitable future for everyone. And on that note, we'll leave you with some resources in the show notes so you can continue exploring this important topic.
And don't forget, change starts with each of us.
So go out there and be the change you want to see in the world. Thanks for listening.